Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 1 of our 6-series podcast, Determined for More. Today, we're actually going to be talking about accepting the realities of neurodiversity and autism or Asperger traits, or suspecting that, or formal diagnoses of that, and how that intersects with the recovery that you may be doing from sexual integrity issues. So we're here to talk about the complexities of the emotions that come, really look at, what is in front of you, what is behind you as you look back in your story. And so we're just going to kind of dive into a conversation around that today. A little bit of our story is going to be shared. We're going to just allow this open, free conversation.
Awesome. I think I'll start with maybe how we came to really think of neurodiversity in our relationship. So for many years, Sean and I had struggled with different therapists along the way of really finding a tool, finding a resource, finding something that stuck with me primarily. Something that I could connect with, something that just really flowed for me. I could find things that therapists would recommend or coaches would help with, and I'd be good for a few weeks. Maybe I could pull it off for a few months, and then it would fade, and we'd be right back to kind of where we were. And I think that the important part of that story is we did not first jump to neurodiversity in the very beginning. It was something that evolved, that actually kind of just came. So we weren't really seeking out, to find a neurodiversity and pin it on that. It was really just through those struggles and through those challenges of just really determined for more, as the book is called, to find what else was there. And it was, I think, actually your therapist that brought that up first.
Yeah. And it was probably my 10th therapist that brought it up. And really looking at, I love that you said that. Really, it wasn't the first thing that we went after. So our story, if you've read the book, this is not going to be new information. If you haven't read it, you can dive into the full story. But we are about 15 years out of the discovery and the disclosure of sexual integrity issues. And so that had been in our past, but there was still a lot of stumbling blocks. So here's what I want to say with that first is, if that has not been addressed, or if there is not a good level of sobriety, I want to caution you on stepping into this lens of neurodiversity and, like you said, going and pinning it into that, because a lot of addictive or problematic behaviors can look very similar to some of the autism traits. And so I just want to caution that, just kind of out the gate a little bit, that really we are talking, like, our purpose here is to talk to couples that have a level of sobriety, that have been doing work on the relationship. And in episode 2, we're actually going to talk about the relational safety. So if that's not in place yet, I think it's really important that we have that relational safety in place. But anyways, I just wanted to kind of touch on that first as we were getting going in the series, because now we were able to look through the years at what else it might be. So what other co-occurring consideration could be happening for us?
And can I give my disclaimer too?
Yep, your disclaimer.
So my disclaimer to the guys is that whether you have had a formal diagnosis or have informally, kind of identified with neurodiversity, that is not an excuse for you of any of your past behavior. It does not make it right. It does not excuse it. It may help explain some things, and it may help explain some patterns in things. But in no way do you getting a diagnosis of autism or you identifying yourself now as autistic, do you get to wave the white flag and say, truce on that that was just my autism. While autism is something that we have to struggle with and overcome, it does not give us the freedom to create abuse, to sin, to create harm and trauma to our partner. And so, again, in episode 1, just want to lay that out there very clearly, that that's not what we go after a diagnosis of neurodiversity for.
Mm-hmm. And can I clarify something you said? I think I know what you mean. When you say overcome, I think I kind of heard you say overcome autism, but I think what you're meaning is overcoming the struggles or the harms that the traits of autism can create in a relationship.
Yes.
Versus
the
overcoming the neurodifference.
I wish we could overcome that, but
right?
Unfortunately that's part of our brain's wiring that is what it is. But being able to overcome the challenges that come from that and being able to work through those. Not the diagnosis itself.
That's what I thought you meant there.
So let's jump in real quick about getting a diagnosis or identifying as neurodiverse, or in our case, autistic or Asperger's. So many folks may say, well, it seems like there's been a lot of focus on autism spectrum disorder lately and not so much on Asperger's. Well, many folks have maybe previously been diagnosed as Asperger's. In today's diagnostic manual that therapists use for giving a diagnosis, Asperger's is no longer a diagnosis. Autism is now defined as a spectrum. And on that spectrum, you have autism level 1 through level 4. And it's based upon the needs.
3 or 4? Might be 3. I don't know. Maybe 4. Sorry. I don't know.
And it's based upon the needs that an individual has as they deal with the diagnosis. And so somebody who needs a lot of services is a higher level on the spectrum. And somebody who does not need many resources would be like an autism level 1. And that's where I fall into. And autism level 1 was previously often called Asperger's. And so that's kind of where they relate together. Now, whether you've received a formal diagnosis or whether you've done some online assessments and you are identifying as having characteristics and traits of neurodiversity, it really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we're talking about characteristics and behaviors within a relationship that cause challenges. Now, accepting and understanding where they come from can be really empowering as a part of that growth journey for us. And that's really where I felt, the strength and the empowerment of, okay, this isn't something wrong with me. This is actually something that I can embrace. God has created me in his image and in his likeness. And this is just my part of who I am and how I get to move forward with that. And there are some wonderful things of my autism that I bring to my life, to my work, to our relationship. There's also the hard things that come as a result of that as well. And so really just kind of seeing that, whether it's a formal diagnosis or an identification of neurodiversity, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. And clearly we are here as a couple that has walked through this. I am a professional coach. Kevin is a mentor within Living Stones, and we are not clinicians. So I do want to say that. So we will be a little clumsy clearly when we're talking about diagnostic statistic manuals and things like that. I'm like, wait, I gotta look that up. So I just want to put that out there too, that we're not here to say this is you or this is why this is you. We really, our heart wants you to explore that, and I think that's why you're talking about whether it's a formal diagnosis, an informal self-assessment, something like that, just being open to this possibility if you're hitting other roadblocks, because accepting those realities has been really hard for us. So I just wanted to say that and just remind the listeners that we're here to let you explore what this looks like for you. There is a saying that all autistics, not one is, what is the saying?
Once you've met one autistic, you've met one autistic.
Yeah. And I'll say once you've met one neurodiverse couple, you've met one neurodiverse couple, because we all have differences. We are bringing so much to the table. We're bringing our histories. We're bringing our childhood wounds. We might be bringing problematic or addictive behaviors. And again, I also want to say with that, we are not saying that because you're autistic, there are problematic addictive behaviors. What we are saying is that is a part of our story, and that's also the audience that we're talking to mostly, because that intersection of, problematic sexual behavior or integrity issues is it's not being talked about with this lens. So
Yeah.
that's really our passion in coming to these realities.
Awesome. Yeah, I was just going to say that same thing is, we are by no way perfect. We are on this journey as well. We might be a little further ahead on this journey, and if that's where you are coming along on this journey, we invite you to come with us. And I think if you have read the book, the one thing that you will quickly learn of us is we're pretty transparent in what we share, and in what our vulnerability with that, because we truly believe that genuine and authentic healing really comes when we are authentic and transparent with ourselves, individually, as a couple, and then when we begin to share that. I think that just in the last probably 2 years or so, the relationships that we have been able to meet in our vulnerability and in our transparency has just been overwhelming to us, of just the eyes that are opening even to us and going, oh my gosh, like, had no idea what was out there for us.
Yeah. And it really does take that away. I mean, we just had a conversation with another couple this week that's really striving for their marriage as well. And what we thought would be like a 30-minute conversation ended up being an hour and a half. And it felt like we were friends. It felt like we could understand one another. And we hope that even as you're listening to this, whether it's just one of you or both of you, that you will feel like there are others that are walking through this, because we groveled a lot to be sitting here today and actually being able to talk to you about this. And that even comes with difficulties, sometimes on the daily, even today, even this morning. And so looking at that and just remembering that is a part of the story. And we do bring our faith journey into this, so we'll be talking about that as well. So does it feel good if we can dive into kind of some of the accepted, like the things we've accepted as realities, and maybe some things that could help?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So again, for me, like I shared, it was empowering for me to have a diagnosis, to begin to go, okay, that's why I do that. And I think it also really helped Shauna as well, when we could identify some of those things, like, okay, wait a minute, Kevin's not just being a jerk to me. He's, sensory overloaded right now, or he's, feeling stressed. The plan's just changed and he's needing to adapt for a minute. Like, yes, he just snapped at me, but he's really more struggling with the plan changing at this moment than it is me. And so I think I'm speaking maybe for you that it helped not personalize it so much. Again, doesn't excuse me doing it. I need to do the work to regulate myself. I need to focus on that on an hourly basis most days. But so some of those things that we talked about in identifying with autism. So for me, one of the big things for me is the lack of empathy and the lack of emotions and understanding emotions. There's a definition that we will talk more about called alexithymia. And so really kind of seeing the impact of what that meant to our relationship. And I know so many times, Shauna, you would say, I don't feel seen, I don't feel heard, I don't feel that you're understanding me or that you are connecting with me. And she was right. I wasn't. I was struggling, and I was trying really hard. And I think that's part of the rigidness and part of the challenge that comes with my neurodiversity as well, as I'm rigid, I'm inflexible. And so when I'm trying to connect with my wife and I can't, I'm not, that becomes frustrating for me as a part of the doing versus being.
Yeah, I think, accepting this reality, it came with a lot of relief, and it came with a lot of grief. And both of those were held kind of simultaneously at times, and other times one would dominate over the other. And so recognizing, like, what do I need in that moment? And letting each of us go through our own process, especially early in the awareness and acceptance that this was a possibility, because we went round and round of whatever else it could be that was causing different things. And we know attachment style, we know anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, we understand all of that. And there was still more. So I just want to say that, even in these moments of, where you recognize things like, gosh, I'm having trouble cueing into you, or I don't understand, I'd cry and he'd kind of look at me with a blank stare. That came with a lot of like acceptance and working through the grief process for me of, but is that going to change? Like, maybe it could get better, but I don't know that the gap would be filled completely. And so I needed to grieve that. I really did. And I also had relief, like you said, that it wasn't personal. That what you were doing now, sometimes can I still take it personally? Yes. But the reality was I could say, oh, his intent wasn't to withhold intentionally from me or not include me in, a conversation or something like that. So.
Yeah. And I think with our story, having first a history of sexual betrayal in our relationship, where I think when there was discovery of sexual betrayal, it was like, holy cow, like, your world just got rocked upside down, right? Over
sure.
What's reality, what is going on, like what can I believe, what's true, what's not true. And I gotta think that in a diagnosis of autism. So I was diagnosed at 50. We had been married 24 years at that point. So I would have to think a part of that grieving was realizing now at 50 and 24 years into a marriage, what is this now again, right? What were some of those grief parts?
I would say, I know both of our minds kind of went back to some early interactions that we had, and going back to the grief of lost time, that if we would have known, I hear that a lot with women and with couples, of if I would have known, or if we would have known, could we have done something different earlier? That was one. Also, I think having been through the sexual brokenness and the deception intimately that I had been through, it was like, oh my gosh, like the grief of now there's something else. And I know that was something for you too, of like, oh my gosh, there's something else. And so, and we had at least enough years in between this, which I know a lot of listeners that are going to hear this are not going to have that much time. So accepting this reality on top of accepting a reality that you might have, a sex addict, married to, or someone in recovery, or maybe there's been financial deception. There can be lots of different betrayals. But I just think that is, that's really hard. Or maybe the autism came first and the awareness and acceptance around that. And then now you're dealing with the sexual brokenness. That can be really, really hard, because it's like they're back to back. Yeah. Whereas we did have some space in between there, but my heart goes out because I really, I just hear that being even harder when we don't have a lot of space in between.
Yeah. And at the same time, the years that we had in between were hard as well.
Very hard.
And so, it's, never think that, somebody doesn't have it worse than you, or whatever the saying is, right? Like, I don't know. It's, they're both hard. And so regardless of where you may find yourself, we just, invite you to embrace that and to, really just surrender that, and just to kind of sit and to find some peace in that. I know for me on the grief side, while there was empowerment of being able to connect the dots for a lot of things, I think that was one of the first things I had shared with Shauna. After I had kind of listened to a podcast that resonated with me, I was like, wow, like for the first time in my life, the dots like feel like they're connecting now, and it makes sense. And we had probably 2 months between our kind of informal acceptance that I was probably neurodiverse and had autism, to our formal diagnosis. And so we had a couple of months there where we were kind of sitting in that and felt pretty confident and secure that that was going to be the case and that we would find ourselves there. But I remember sitting on the couch when we had our phone call with the clinical neuropsychologist, and I remember the words today, just like I was sitting on that couch several years ago, and her words were, "So based upon all of that, I am going to give Kevin a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder level 1. And it was like a hit to the gut. It really was. And even though I had known it, even though I was fully expecting it, I think hearing those words was a big hit. And for me, it just became a flood of emotions, of on one side awareness and relief, and on the other side grief and loss of I shared with Shauna, and I think this is in the book, that one of the first things I had said to Shauna after the call was, "I'm so sorry. It could have looked so different." And what I meant by that was, had I known of my neurodiversity earlier in our marriage, the tools that I've learned over these last few years, the tools that we continue to learn and grow on, the awareness that I'm working to have on a regular basis, I could have been employing those decades ago, which would have then hopefully prevented decades of pain, emotional neglect, and hurt in so many ways. And so the grief for me of just having to sit and own that and accept that. And then the grief of, I'm different, and I'm not normal. I'm not neurotypical. And just what society says about that today. Going back to the levels of autism, and when we say autism, I know even my therapist at the time when I was going for my assessment had said to me, I don't think you're autistic. You don't present with kind of the common traits, lack of eye contact, inability to communicate well, some of the very high level assessment tools for autism. And I think that in society, when we think of somebody with autism, we really think of somebody much further down the spectrum. We think of the individuals that are, nonverbal autistics. We think of those that are, unable to function with their activities of daily living. And in society, that's the perception of what autism looks like. And so it can be very difficult to get to a diagnosis for those of us that are older. I think it's much more common and easier for children these days than it is for adults to be diagnosed. And that's, that's one of the challenges, is having that formal diagnosis with somebody that does specialize in adult diagnosis versus, trying to find that.
Yeah, I was going to say something on that when you said, I think it's more acceptable in children. This reminds me, we were putting something into AI this week. ChatGPT. And I didn't use it for any of the book or anything. I didn't even know about it really. But anyways, we went to put something in and we were saying something about autism in our marriage, and it changed it to autism in the child in the home. And I was like, oh my gosh.
And there was no word of child in anything that we gave
around
into
kids.
it.
And so I thought, okay, AI is a whole new world, whatever. But the reality, just like my jaw just felt like, are you kidding? Like, we're not even talking about, like, AI doesn't even know how to talk about this. And AI is pretty smart. But anyways, I think that other thing I wanted to say real quick on what you were sharing is the differences, and feeling different, and how many times you had felt so different because you couldn't connect to some of the things I was saying. And what's so interesting to me is one of my false core beliefs is I am too different. And I thought, wow, we both kind of have that, and different in different ways, and how we don't want to be different. We don't want to be different. And I do wonder if 10 years ago, when we were going through like the recovery and sobriety work around your infidelity, if that would have, like, if you would have been willing to accept it. I don't know. Like, and I think the battle of awareness to acceptance is pretty big. You could have still tried to make changes, but I do wonder about that. So the relief that you got, I think, was such a timing issue, like a divine timing from God of how you knew, but you bargain and go back and go, what if we did know back then? So I do wonder that. I do wonder what that could have looked like. And
I think there's a big part of responsibility in that I felt that, gosh, had I known this sooner, things could have been different. And then there's almost like I feel this responsibility that I didn't, that I didn't, and I should have, right? And then I should all over myself for what I didn't do. And so then
I hit that perfectionism too. And I want to give like the listeners a few tools before we wrap up here. But if you want to finish that thought just around like, that perfectionism and you should have.
And I think that can be a lot of the resistance. And I think that the older we get, the more ingrained those patterns become, the more things that we have to look back on in our lives and own responsibility for and take responsibility for. And that's a heavy load as well, to look back and have to take that ownership of those things in our lives. And so all of that can really lead to a resistance of wanting to put a label on something. So so I just kind of wanted to wrap up our last few minutes with some things that maybe you guys can be considering, depending on where you are in the acceptance of these possible realities. Maybe you do know, but it's just you're feeling that resistance, or just kind of want to pull the covers over your head and say this isn't part of our story. Now maybe you are feeling relief too, so I just want to leave space for that too, because we felt both. But I think some of the things is considering, like, what are the aspects of it? So taking the label out, I think labels can be knowledge, at least for us they have been. And so I think it's okay. If you want the label there for knowledge and information, great. If you don't... It's not a crutch.
Exactly. Yeah. It is not a crutch, right? You're not saying it to get out of something, but you're looking at the traits. And something that I know you work on with guys sometimes is, looking at that difference between what are those behaviors that are destructive and what are autism traits and how do those intertwine. So that can be really helpful. That's one thing that I just think is consider this is a possibility. Will you just consider the aspects that could be there? Again, not as a crutch, but as information and knowledge to just make your relationship better and to grow. So I don't know what you might leave.
And I think for the guys and those that are neurodiverse, I would leave this to you and really challenge you to say, if you are neurodiverse, what does that say about you? And really processing through what those emotions are and what your beliefs are around what that says about you. And then I really want to challenge you then for the second part, and that is to say, but is it true? What does Scripture tell me about who I am? What does Scripture tell me about my worth and my value and who I am and whose I am? And really being able to shift and accept those challenges that we have in our own unique neurodiversity, and then really almost turning them into a very empowering and in a very just encouraging way to move forward. And I know we're going to dive into this so much more in the full workshop. And so if you are interested in learning about those workshops, you can find out more information in the show notes here below. There's more information on our website, livingstonescoaching.com, and you can find out information there about the workshops. But we just really want to invite you to come along with us.
Yeah. And we are going to dive in deeper, and we are going to do this together. And that's the big piece. Feeling different and alone is very different than feeling different and with others that get and understand us. So that is our goal. That's why we're even offering these couples workshops. So we hope you will join us and consider. We'll dive in deeper to these topics. But we're glad you're here and look forward to seeing you in episode 2.
See you, everybody.